This story is growing up in Charlestown, the pecking order. So if you've ever watched any shows on National Geographic, any of these programs about animals, right? They typically follow from, it's the mating season and here's the dance of the such and such to, the birth of the animals and then their sort of socialization, if you will. And generally, early on, it starts out with the animals, the youngsters picking on each other, right? Seeing who's bigger, who's stronger, who has the strength and the power over each other. And that's important because those animals need to know where they stand in the pecking order. Same thing with dogs, right? So I have a dog, I walk all the time, and sometimes you bump into someone else with the dog, and occasionally they'll have a little scrap. Typically lasts 2 seconds, and they're just trying to find out, where do I stand? Am I above you or below you? Well, when I was growing up in Charlestown, we hung around with, I'll call it a gang, but it wasn't like a gang you had to be beaten into and killed out of or any of that. It was a bunch of kids, all about the same age, generally lived in the same few streets around the neighborhood, and we hung around together. And when we were all together hanging down at Hayes Square, there could be 30, 35, typically guys. There were probably about a dozen or so girls who also hung around, not with us, but sort of separate with us. And, some of them ended up being the girlfriends, the wives, and so forth of some of the guys. But the pecking order, typically at the top were the biggest, the strongest, the toughest guys. And these guys I hung around with, some of them were just sort of undisputed, right? They were the silverbacks of the group, and there was no challenging them. So and typically the gangs would be similar age. So it would be 14 and 15-year-olds. If you were 16 or 17, you were the older kids, right? You were with a different group. But in this pecking order, the people at the top basically could boss anyone around. Not that they often did. The toughest kid in the group never really picked on anyone else. He didn't have to. But then you had sort of the guys at the bottom, right? So they were scrawny maybe, just not tough. They could be the youngest of the group, and so they're not as big as everyone else. And sometimes they could bump their way up a little bit in the pecking order by being funny, being great athletes, being quick-witted, or literally quick to be able to get away. And then you had all these guys in the middle who all were sort of like fighting for where do they stand. And sometimes it was physical, right? So someone would push you, or they'd put you in a bear hug, and could you get out of it? Could you fight them back? Sometimes it turned into real fights. In fact, a few of my closest friends I made friends with because we got into a fight. That's the sort that's the same as two dogs meet up and neither one backs down, right? And so they want to find out, where do they stand? So they kind of have a quick little scuffle, and then that's it. It's over, right? It's water under the bridge. They're done. Well, the same thing would happen in these groups. And so, similar to the what would you call it, in the natural world, right? To the victor goes the spoils, right? So the bigger, faster, stronger animals get the alpha females, or they get the best feeding times, or they get the best food. Well, it was similar in the gang, that if people were like, hey, we're going to the beach, I've got room for 5 people, the top 5 dogs would go to the beach, and the other folks would have to figure their way. But it's interesting whenever I watch some of these shows on television, and I see, I can see some of the characters I grew up with in some of these videos, right? Whether it's lion cubs fighting each other, or birds, or whatever it is, that it's important to know where you stand in that pecking order. And I think over the last generation or so, I don't know that there is a pecking order, because what we would consider fun back then, or whatnot, picking on people, is now bullying, right? And we didn't realize the impact that it would have on people back then. But you know, it's kind of, it was a different generation, it's a different time. I'm sure my parents did things differently and their parents did things differently as well. But in any case, that's the story of growing up in Charlestown and the pecking order and the importance of knowing where you stand.